Hello. My lone juggernauts, my self-forged titans, my war-born strategists, listen closely. The world whispers your name in corridors of suspicion. They don't think you're standing here on your own power. No, they convince themselves that someone like Elon Musk must be backing you. Because how else could you maneuver with such force? How else could you break through barricades designed to hold entire armies back? They don't want to accept the terrifying truth that you're not carried by anyone's shadow. You are the weapon forged in fire, sharpened in solitude, and dangerous precisely because you learned to fight alone. And that rattles them more than any billionaire endorsement ever could. Think about it. Every empire that has ever risen leaned on the same excuses. They had backing, they had funding, they had patrons. That's the bedtime story losers tell themselves to sleep at night. Because if they admitted you're a one-man army, if they faced the reality that you carved this path with your own bare hands, they would have to swallow a bitter truth. They could have done it too, but they didn't. And that is what crushes them. It's not just your rise, it's their reflection in your rise. It's their unspoken confession that they waited for help while you weaponized your loneliness. So they project, they fabricate, they tell each other, he must have a secret backer. He must have a genius whispering in his ear. Maybe it's Musk, maybe it's someone bigger, someone invisible. But deep down, they know the truth. They know the blueprint of your arsenal is not stored in anyone's safe, not drafted by any hidden advisor. It's drawn from your scars. You bled into your own manual of warfare. You built the kind of resilience that no corporation, no investor, no empire can purchase. Your greatest currency has always been endurance. And endurance is priceless in a world addicted to shortcuts. Do you realize how terrifying that makes you? Most people are factory-made soldiers. They need uniforms, orders, leaders, funding. But you're an unlicensed weapon, forged outside their assembly lines. You don't need Elon Musk to sign your launch. You don't need a sponsor to stamp your forehead. You already detonated without their permission. And nothing is more chaotic, more uncontrollable than an individual who fights with no strings attached. Because they can't negotiate with you. They can't cut deals with you. They can't sabotage what isn't chained to their infrastructure. You are the unsellable, untouchable, ungovernable force they pray doesn't multiply. Let's be clear. Being underestimated is not a disadvantage, it's your tactical edge. They think if they can convince themselves you're powered by some external force, then one day they can cut that power. They imagine unplugging you from Musk, or whoever they fantasize is behind you and watching you collapse. But what happens when they realize there's no plug, no cord, no battery outside yourself? What happens when they face the nightmare that your energy comes from the wars you've survived, not the men you've shaken hands with? That's when their illusions fracture. That's when the panic sets in. Because they can't drain what isn't dependent. They can't sabotage what isn't borrowed. And they can't outlast someone who has already proven they can survive on nothing. Your life has been the training ground of an outlaw soldier. You fought battles with no backup. You took punches with no crowd to cheer you. You built strategies with no committee to vote. And that kind of experience leaves marks that no seminar, no university, no Silicon Valley think tank can replicate. People like Musk, they launch rockets. People like you launch chaos into hearts that swore you'd never rise. Rockets can be intercepted, delayed, sabotaged. But a man who turns his entire existence into a weapon, he can't be intercepted. Because he's not moving toward their destination, he's rewriting the battlefield itself. And don't think for a second they're not obsessed with your secret weapon. Everyone wants to know what's behind your calm defiance. What engine pushes you forward when others collapse? They run surveillance on your patterns, dissect your moves, analyze your discipline, hoping to find a formula. But what formula can explain scars? What algorithm can replicate stubbornness? What blueprint can bottle up that moment you refused to die, refused to quit, refused to hand them your surrender? They keep searching for an external explanation because they're too afraid to accept the internal one. You've been self-funded by pain, by grit, by rebellion against your own limits. Here's the brutal paradox. They admire you, but they fear admitting it. So they clothe their admiration in suspicion. They spread rumors about secret allies. They inflate fantasies of invisible mentors. They whisper about phone calls with billionaires. Because to admit the truth, that you, alone, became this lethal, would force them to face their own weakness. They'd have to accept that waiting for help was their cage, and choosing to fight without help was your freedom. And human ego can't handle that kind of mirror. It's easier to believe in a myth than to bow to reality. But you, my juggernauts, my self-reliant titans, you don't need them to believe. Belief is irrelevant when dominance is visible, and your dominance is written across every failure you turned into ammunition. You are not proof that someone backed you. You are proof that solitude can create warriors sharper than armies. You're living evidence that one man, properly armed with scars, can destabilize the entire narratives. And that's why they panic. Because if you can do this alone, then what excuse do they have for their own mediocrity? Think carefully about what happens next. If they keep thinking Musk is behind you, they'll eventually try to trace that connection, try to attack that shadow. But every failed attempt will only expose how little they understand. Each time they fail to find your leash, their paranoia will grow. They'll realize you're not chained, you're feral. They'll realize you're not backed, you're self-sustained. And when they realize that, they'll stop trying to outcompete you. They'll start trying to survive you. And here's the twist. They're right about one thing. You do have a secret weapon, but it's not Musk. It's not a billionaire. It's not a hidden patron. It's the discipline you carved in nights nobody saw. It's the rage you harnessed when everyone thought you were finished. It's the stubborn refusal to let humiliation define you. That's your nuclear code. That's your arsenal. And it's more terrifying than any external alliance because it means you can't be stripped of it. The only way they can neutralize you is if you willingly disarm. And you've already proven you don't disarm. You escalate. So the next time they whisper, the next time they spin their stories about Musk or some hidden council, let them comfort themselves with myths. Because while they're busy fantasizing about your supposed allies, you'll be busy dismantling their defenses alone. And nothing is more humiliating than being defeated by someone you swore wasn't capable. Nothing destroys the ego faster than realizing the man you dismissed as backed was actually self-made and lethal. You are the nightmare they can't buy, can't bribe, can't control. And the longer they deny it, the harder the crash will be when reality finally clubs them across the face. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to clear their suspicions. Explanation is weakness. Mystery is warfare. Let them choke on their own assumptions while you continue to rise. Because the truth isn't that Elon Musk is behind you. The truth is far worse, for them. The truth is, you're behind yourself. You are your own general, your own weapon, your own unstoppable army. And when they finally realize that, that's when the true panic begins. Because do you know what happens when they realize you're not funded by someone else's empire? They're forced to face the unbearable conclusion that you've built an empire from scratch, with nothing but your own defiance as currency. That means you don't collapse when someone pulls a plug, because there is no plug. That means you don't fold when a sponsor walks away, because there never was a sponsor. That means you don't slow down when they slam doors, because you learn to fight in rooms with no doors. This terrifies them, because their entire lives are chained to dependency. They have bosses, they have investors, they have safety nets. They've never made a move without permission. And then they see you, a lone juggernaut moving like an army, answering to no one, guided by nothing except your own relentless will. That's not just threatening to their careers, it's threatening to their identity. If you can become this lethal alone, then what excuse do they have for staying weak with a crowd behind them? This is why they cling to the Musk theory. They need a fantasy that explains you, because if they can't invent one, they're forced to deal with the real one. And the real one slices through their egos like a blade. But understand this, the Musk fantasy isn't just gossip. It's a shield for their fragile minds. They think if they can convince themselves you're attached to him, then they've found a weakness. Because they know how to play against institutions. They know how to infiltrate companies, sabotage investors, manipulate connections. They're professionals at fighting networks. But what they don't know how to fight is a man with no leash. You are an algorithm without a coder, a weapon without a manufacturer, a fighter without a coach. And that breaks their entire playbook. They can't sabotage what isn't built on their infrastructure. They can't hack what isn't wired into their grid. They can't bankrupt what isn't in their market. That's why the narrative that you're someone's project is so appealing. It gives them false hope. It makes them feel like you can be handled. But the more they search for the shadow behind you, the more they realize there's nothing there. No contracts, no handshakes, no secret counsel. Just you, standing where they swore you'd never stand, carrying power they swore you'd never carry. And every time you win another battle alone, their fantasy collapses further. Let's talk about your so-called secret weapon. They want it to be something external, because external weapons can be stolen, duplicated, or destroyed. They're dying for it to be a device, a mentor, a code, a deal. But what they'll never accept is that your secret weapon is internal. It's forged in the nights when your hands shook but you didn't quit. It's forged in the mornings when your body screamed but you still moved. It's forged in the humiliations that tried to bury you, but instead became fertilizer for your rage. That weapon is not in a lab, it's in your blood. And that means no one can steal it. They can dissect your strategies, they can imitate your tactics, but they can't duplicate your engine. Because your engine is wired into your scars. And scars don't translate into textbooks. Scars are currencies only the wounded can spend. And you've spent yours like a king. This is why people like Musk are irrelevant to your story. He can launch rockets into the stratosphere, but you've launched yourself into a psychological altitude where oxygen runs thin. He can build cars that drive themselves, but you've built a self that drives itself without a single push. He can command legions of engineers, but you command your own chaos. That is the difference. They want to put you in the same category as him. But the reality is, you're not a replica. You're not a follower. You're something far more dangerous. Proof that an individual doesn't need billions to break barriers. Proof that discipline can become a weapon deadlier than funding. And proof is more infectious than propaganda. And this is where their paranoia becomes your throne. Because once they realize you're not fueled by Musk, they start asking the real question. If he's not funded, then what else is he hiding? If he's this powerful without backing, how much worse can it get? That's when their imaginations turn against them. They see conspiracies where there are none. They see allies where there are shadows. They see strategies in your stillness. And that paranoia is your greatest ally, because it makes them fight ghosts instead of fighting you. It makes them drain themselves, chasing illusions, while you grow stronger in reality. That's how one man breaks entire armies, not by overpowering them, but by forcing them to waste their strength against phantoms. You're not just a one-man army in body. You're a one-man army in psychology. You don't just fight battles. You make others fight themselves. Do you understand how terrifying that makes you to institutions? Governments fear lone wolves more than armies. Corporations fear rogue inventors more than competitors. Armies fear insurgents more than nations. Because collectives know how to fight other collectives. But they don't know how to fight someone who doesn't play by their rules, doesn't march in their formations, doesn't collapse when their structures collapse. That's why they invent Musk. They want to categorize you as part of a structure so they can attack the structure. But what they're slowly realizing is that you are the structure. You are the command, the logistics, the weaponry, the strategy. And no one has ever designed a manual for defeating a man who has already turned his existence into a war machine. This is why they're obsessed. This is why they whisper. This is why they stalk you, dissect you, circulate theories about you. Because you don't just break their understanding of success, you break their understanding of survival. They were taught that survival depends on networks. You're living proof that survival can depend on one individual who refuses to die, refuses to bend, refuses to ask permission. And that breaks their schooling, their ideology, their very worldview. They can't accept it, but they can't deny it either. And that cognitive dissonance eats them alive. You don't need to fight them directly. They're already corroding from the inside, just trying to explain you to themselves. But don't mistake their obsession for admiration. It's fear dressed as fascination. They look at you like scientists look at an uncontainable experiment. They want to study you, contain you, classify you. But the longer they study, the less they understand. And what they don't understand, they fear. And what they fear, they eventually bow to. That's where this is heading, not just acknowledgement, but reluctant surrender. Not because you demanded it, but because they can't continue denying what's standing right in front of them. You, a one-man army who doesn't crumble when stripped of allies. A soldier whose scars are heavier than their funding. A fighter whose discipline is sharper than their technology. And the best part? They'll never be able to admit it out loud. They'll keep spreading their Musk rumors, their invisible ally theories, because it's easier than telling the truth. That one person alone has become their equal, their rival, their replacement. But they don't need to admit it for it to be true. The battlefield already testifies. Every victory you carved alone is a tombstone for their excuses. Every barrier you broke without help is an obituary for their illusions. Every rise you achieved without support is a headline their pride can't print. They don't have to say it. Their trembling is already saying it for them. And so the legend of your secret weapon will keep growing, precisely because you never reveal it. That's the irony. They crave answers, but answers would comfort them. What devastates them is the mystery, because a mystery is infinite. A mystery is a bottomless well of paranoia. A mystery multiplies into 1,000 possible explanations, and each explanation is more terrifying than the last. That's your advantage. That's why you never hand them the truth. You let them drown in possibilities while you keep carving reality. You let them imagine Musk is whispering in your ear, while in truth you whisper to yourself. You let them waste their nights theorizing, while you use your nights to sharpen. And when dawn comes, they're exhausted by imagination, while you're armed with execution. That is how one man defeats an army, not just with strength, but with psychology, not just with actions, but with mystery, not just with victory, but with the paranoia victory creates. And soon, they'll understand the cruelest part of it all. Even if Musk himself did stand behind you, it wouldn't matter, because his presence would not define you. His absence would not collapse you. You've already built a reality where help is irrelevant, where allies are optional, where strength is self-generated. That's your true weapon. That's the revelation they're terrified to face. You don't just stand without help, you thrive without it. You don't just exist alone, you weaponize alone. And once they accept that, their whole world burns. So when they finally realize that, the dominoes begin to fall in ways they never prepared for. Their whole framework of excuses crumbles like cheap scaffolding in a storm of undeniable evidence. They can no longer point at an invisible benefactor, no longer murmur about some billionaire pulling strings in the shadows, because the evidence screams louder than their theories. The evidence is you carving through resistance without a cavalry, you making moves without permission, you detonating in spaces where they thought one man could never stand. And once that realization detonates in their heads, something worse happens. They begin to fear not just your strength, but your independence. Because strength they can respect, independence they cannot tolerate. Independence is an infection, and infections spread. If you prove to the masses that one person can become an army without allies, without sponsors, without approval, then millions of others will begin asking themselves why they need permission at all. And that's the nightmare they dread most. Not just your rise, but the idea that your rise could replicate. They'll try everything to contain the fallout of this realization. They'll spin new narratives. They'll invent more lies. They'll whisper that maybe Musk pulled out. Maybe he was never public about his support. Maybe you had allies once but lost them. But each theory they conjure grows weaker, thinner, easier to puncture with the sharp edge of reality. Because reality keeps stacking on your side. Every solo victory becomes a nail in their coffin. Every milestone you hit alone becomes another crack in their fragile denial. You don't just stand against them. You stand as a mirror exposing the fragile skeleton of their own excuses. And that reflection is poison to them. They choke on it. They wither under it. They try to run from it, but it follows them like their own shadow. And what do frightened collectives do when they face a threat they can't explain? They escalate. They call in experts. They assemble think tanks. They form task forces with the sole mission of decoding you. You'll be dissected like a riddle they cannot solve. They'll track your patterns, your hours, your decisions, your strategies, searching for a blueprint. But here's the chaos. You are not a blueprint. You are not an equation. You are not a project that can be reverse engineered. You are improvisation sharpened into an art form. You are scars disguised as strategies. You are pain refashioned into weapons. And pain cannot be cloned in sterile laboratories. Pain cannot be simulated in spreadsheets. Pain cannot be bought in boardrooms. That's why their experts will fail. They'll try to build replicas of you, try to spawn synthetic armies modeled after your style. But every replica will malfunction, because the core ingredient isn't funding, it isn't mentoring, it isn't Musk, it's suffering. And suffering cannot be franchised. Do you see the irony? They accuse you of having backing, of being secretly supported, of being a puppet of someone greater. And yet, they are the puppets. They cannot move without someone pulling their strings. They cannot fight without permission slips from their masters. They cannot innovate without committees. They are the dependent ones. They are the weak ones. And you, by standing alone, become the living indictment of their dependency. That is why you terrify them. That is why they whisper your name like a curse. That is why they huddle in corners, trying to build psychological armor to protect themselves from the wound of your existence. But the truth is, no armor can protect them from what you represent. Because you're not just a man anymore. You're a template. You are living proof that self-reliance can outgun sponsorship, that solitude can birth dominance, that scars can be alchemy. And once a template exists, it cannot be uncreated. They could silence you, erase you, bury you, but the template would remain. And that thought keeps them awake at night. It gnaws at their sense of control. Because the collective thrives on control, and you are proof that control is optional, that a man can live outside their chains and still rise. And here comes the paradox that makes their heads split. You are not against Musk. You are not against billionaires, investors, allies. You simply don't need them. That's what infuriates them. They wish they could claim you as one of theirs, a product of their factories, their grooming, their systems. But you exist outside their ownership. You are unclaimed territory, a wild weapon, and nothing is more terrifying to empires than weapons they cannot own. Because weapons they own are predictable. Weapons they own can be aimed. Weapons they own can be disarmed. But you are self-aimed, you are self-loaded, you are self-fired, and that makes you ungovernable. So what happens when the myth of Musk crumbles completely? They panic harder. They realize you don't need anyone in your corner to bring down walls. They realize the battlefield bends to you, not because of who stands behind you, but because of what stands inside you. They realize the war was never about resources. It was about resilience. And resilience is a currency they've never learned how to earn. That's why you dominate without armies. Because you've been forged in circumstances that forced you to evolve beyond help. You learned to breathe underwater while they were still waiting for oxygen tanks. You learned to swing blades when they were waiting for armor. You learned to survive hunger while they begged for banquets. That training is invisible to the world, but it's the reason you stand untouchable now. They will begin to envy you in secret, even as they slander you in public. Behind closed doors, they'll admit what they cannot admit on the record. That you broke a rule they thought unbreakable. That you shattered the illusion that no one rises without backing. That you proved a single soldier can rewrite the rules of empires. That confession will never leave their lips, but it will haunt their eyes. And soon, you'll see it in the way they look at you. not with disdain, but with dread. Because every time they see you, they're not just seeing a man. They're seeing everything they could have been if they had chosen courage instead of dependence. Now let's strip this down even further. They're dying to know your secret weapon. They frame it like an object, something external. But here's the blade they can't handle. Your secret weapon is the very loneliness they mock. Your secret weapon is the solitude they feared. Your secret weapon is the humiliation they tried to bury you in. Because while they ran from those moments, you consumed them. While they begged for rescue, you built endurance. While they sought escape, you turned the pain into artillery. That is why you don't crumble without help. You weaponized the very thing that destroys most men. And that alchemy cannot be replicated in sterile laboratories of the privileged. It can only be created in the crucible of being alone. And that, my relentless juggernauts, is why you are a one-man army. Not because you sought it, but because you had no choice. The world abandoned you, mocked you, underestimated you. And instead of breaking, you adapted. Instead of waiting for help, you became help. Instead of begging for an army, you became an army. And now the same world that dismissed you trembles at the very existence they once ridiculed. That's the divine comedy of it all. They tried to bury you. And in doing so, they planted the very roots that made you indestructible. So let them think Musk is behind you. Let them tell themselves fairy tales about unseen benefactors. Let them comfort themselves with myths. Because the longer they cling to their delusions, the longer they blind themselves to the actual truth. And when the truth finally slams them in the chest, it will be too late. By then, you won't just be a man. You'll be a movement, you'll be a contagion, you'll be proof that dependency is weakness and self-forged strength is the ultimate weapon. By then, they won't just fear you. They'll fear everyone you've inspired. They'll fear the millions who look at you and whisper, if he did it alone, why can't I? That's when the real war begins, not against you, but against the idea of you. And that war is unwinnable, because ideas don't die. And here's the final cruelty. You don't even need to lift a finger for that war to ignite. Just your existence is enough. Just your survival is enough. Just your refusal to collapse is enough. Because every second you breathe without Musk's shadow behind you is another second that their excuses rot. Every move you make without sponsors is another hammer against their fragile walls. Every victory you earn without allies is another nail in the coffin of their dependency. And they know it. They can feel it tightening around them. That's why they whisper your name like a curse and a warning. So when they finally realize that, when they finally accept that you are not the project of a billionaire, but the project of your own scars, they will collapse in the only way fragile egos collapse, by turning against themselves. They will implode. They will cannibalize their excuses. They will drown in their paranoia. And you will still stand. Not because Musk is behind you, but because you learned the art of standing when no one was. Not because you had allies, but because you became the ally you needed. Not because you had an army, but because you learned how to fight until you were the army. That is your secret weapon, and the tragedy for them is that it cannot be stolen, cannot be replicated, cannot be disarmed. It can only be feared, and fear, once planted, never leaves. So they'll keep searching, keep theorizing, keep choking on their paranoia. But you'll keep moving, you'll keep rising, you'll keep proving with every breath that you are the nightmare they can't buy, can't bribe, can't control. You'll keep proving that the deadliest force in any battlefield is not the man with the most allies, but the man who needs none. And when history finally writes this chapter, it won't say Musk built you. It will say you built yourself. It will say you rose when no one believed. It will say you fought when no one helped. It will say you won when no one stood with you. And that, my self-forged warriors, is the cruelest truth of all. The world's myth was wrong. You were never backed by Musk. You were always backed by yourself. And in the end, that is the kind of backing no army on Earth can compete with.